Somewhere beneath your feet, if you are standing on Edinburgh's Royal Mile on the right spot, directly above where the old city chambers now sits, there is a street, a full, intact 17th century street, with stone walls still black from extinguished hearths, timber beams still carrying the weight of 400 years of silence, and rooms that once held families who woke up one morning in the summer of 1645 and never left. This is not a ghost story. It is something considerably more unsettling than that. It is a true one. Edinburgh, 1645. A city gripped by the worst outbreak of bubonic plague in its recorded history, with as many as 10,000 of its residents gone within weeks. At the heart of it, one narrow, plunging, shadow-choked alleyway running off the high street that would be sealed beneath a new building a century later and forgotten for 200 years. This is Mary King's Close. And this is what it actually was before it became legend. You have to understand what Edinburgh looked like before you can understand what killed it. The city in the early 17th century was one of the most densely populated urban environments in the entire world, not by choice, but by necessity. A volcanic ridge of basalt rock, crowned by a medieval castle at one end and a royal palace at the other, with the spine of the Royal Mile running between them like the ridge of a spine. Around that spine, fanning out down the steep slopes on either side, were the closes and wynds, hundreds of narrow alleyways, some barely wide enough for two people to pass each other sideways, cut deep into the hillside and lined on both sides by the tenement buildings the Scots called lands. These were not small buildings. Edinburgh's lands were, in the 17th century, quite possibly the tallest residential structures in the world, rising in places to 14 stories, their uppermost floors jutting outward over the closes below as each successive floor was built out beyond the last, until the light at the bottom of the alley was reduced to a grey slit of sky somewhere far overhead. They were the world's first skyscrapers, not built from ambition, but from constraint. The Flodden Wall ringed the city on all sides. There was no room to spread outward. So Edinburgh grew upward, floor on floor, family on family, generation pressed against generation in rooms that often housed an entire household in a single chamber. Society in these tenements was arranged vertically, and the arrangement was a reversal of every intuition. The wealthy lived at the top, above the stench, above the noise, catching whatever breeze managed to find the roofline. The poor lived at the bottom, in near-permanent shadow, in rooms where the sun rarely reached the floor, next to the streams of effluent that ran down the alley's central gutter toward the Norloch, a lake on the city's northern edge that had, by 1645, become little more than an open sewer, thick and reeking, into which the entire city's waste eventually drained. There was no other sanitation system. Each household kept a bucket for everything: urine, waste, cooking refuse, sickness. Once in the morning and once at night, a cry rang out from windows up and down the closes: "Gardez-l'eau!" A corruption of the French "Gardez-l'eau," watch out for the water, and the contents of the bucket were flung into the street below. If you were standing at the bottom of Mary King's Close at the wrong moment, in the wrong position, you simply received whatever fell. The waste ran in channels between the cobblestones, green-black and steaming in cold weather, and the rats came for it in their thousands. Mary King herself, the woman who gave the close its name, had moved there in 1635, 5 years after her husband's passing, setting herself up as a fabric merchant with enough shrewdness and commercial confidence to run a thriving business as a woman alone in a trade dominated by men. She was a burgess of the city, a formal designation, and a rare one for a woman of her time, and her close was named for her in recognition of that standing. She lived there with her 4 children in a building that mixed stories of affluent merchant families with the cramped quarters of tradesmen, apprentices, and the very poor. A candlemaker on one floor, a weaver below him, a family of 6 in a single room below that. The close had its own baker, its own tailor, its own tavern. In the days before the plague, it was, like dozens of other closes running off the Royal Mile, a complete, self-contained community, loud and reeking and vigorously alive. Now, a detail the legend almost always buries beneath its dramatic retelling. The plague did not arrive in Edinburgh like a sudden blow. It arrived at the port of Leith in late 1644, carried, almost certainly, on the backs of rats in the hold of an incoming ship. The fleas that fed on those rats carrying the bacterium Yersinia pestis in their tiny, lethal bodies. Over half the population of Leith, the port town just north of Edinburgh, would not survive the outbreak. From Leith, the infected rats found the city. The city's Flodden Wall, built originally to defend against English armies after the catastrophe of Flodden in 1513, now performed a different and terrible function. It kept the plague inside. Edinburgh's City Council appointed its first official plague doctor, John Paulicius, on December 23, 1644, at 40 Scots pounds per month. As the outbreak intensified, they doubled his salary, then raised it to 100 Scots per month, a sum, as contemporary records note, fit for a king. By April 1645, Paulicius himself had contracted the disease and was gone. The council hired his replacement, Dr. George Ray, in June, this time at 110 Scots pounds per month, which Ray subsequently negotiated even higher, because both he and the council understood that no sum of money was likely to keep him alive very long. He survived because of the leather suit. Head to toe in tightly stitched cowhide, a wide-brimmed waxed hat, gloves that sealed at the wrist, and the beak. The long, curved, crow-like mask packed with dried lavender and herbs, which the doctors of the era believed would filter the miasma, the corrupted air that they thought carried the contagion. The herbs did nothing against Yersinia pestis, but the leather, sealed tight against the skin, kept the fleas from biting. It was accidental medicine, the right solution arrived at for entirely the wrong reason. In Mary King's Close and the surrounding alleyways, the disease moved with a speed that the overcrowding made nearly inevitable. Infected residents on shared landings coughed in stairwells used by every household in the building. Fleas hopped between floors, between walls, between families who had no idea what was killing them. Those who showed symptoms were, where possible, moved to isolation huts on the Burg Muir, open ground south of the city walls, where rough wooden shelters had been constructed as quarantine stations. Those too ill to be moved hung white flags from their windows, a signal to the cleaners and the supply runners that food and coal should be left at the door. Nobody would open it for them from outside. Nobody would cross the threshold. At the height of the summer of 1645, historians believe that at one point only 60 able-bodied men remained in the entire city capable of performing its basic functions: guarding the gates, collecting the fallen, maintaining whatever semblance of order the council could enforce. The courts closed, the markets thinned. The closes fell quiet in a way that no close in Edinburgh's history had ever been quiet before, because quiet in a close meant the absence of the living. The mass graves were dug on the Borough Muir, a quarry purchased from a merchant named Robert Gray, whose location historians believe likely corresponds to the ground now occupied by Bruntsfield Links golf course. The depressions in that ground, still visible in certain lights, are the trace of something that the city never quite found language for. In the village of Duddingston nearby, burials increased eightfold in 1645 compared to any previous year. The bodies arrived on carts at night, driven by men who wrapped cloth around their faces and kept their eyes straight ahead. By autumn, the worst was over. By the following year, the plague had largely receded from Edinburgh, not because of anything the city had done, but because Yersinia pestis, like all pandemics, burned through its available population and quieted. The people who had survived returned to the closes. Mary King's Close was re-inhabited. Life resumed, cautiously, diminished, carrying its grief in the way that cities carry grief, by burying it and building over it. And that is almost precisely what happened. In 1753, the Edinburgh Burgh Council commissioned a grand new public building, the Royal Exchange, designed by architect John Adam, to be constructed on the upper reaches of the Royal Mile. The upper floors of Mary King's Close and the adjacent wynds were demolished. But the lower sections, the foundations, the vaulted stone chambers, the rooms carved into the hillside itself, could not be removed without undermining the new building above. So they were kept, sealed, used as a foundation. The close's lower world was simply enclosed beneath the new structure and left, intact, in the dark. For 2 centuries, Edinburgh's city centre walked directly above it and knew nothing of what lay below. The walls retained their soot. The stone floors retained the faint indentations of foot traffic. In one small room, a child's shoe was left behind, unclaimed, in a corner. Fragments of ceramic bowls. A rusted key. The residue of hearth fires lit by hands long gone. In 2003, after years of careful archaeological investigation, the network was reopened to the public as the real Mary King's Close. And those who descend into it today walk through rooms where the 17th century air feels somehow preserved, where original timber beams still run across low ceilings and original stonework carries its 400-year-old marks. In one room, legend holds that a Japanese psychic visiting in 1992 felt the presence of a child, a girl named Annie, 8 years old, who is said to have fallen to the plague in 1645 alone, separated from her family. Whether or not one credits the supernatural, visitors began leaving dolls and stuffed animals and sweets in that room. They still do. Today, the walls are lined with offerings, a shrine that grows each year, a way of acknowledging, perhaps, that the children who vanished beneath Edinburgh's streets deserve to be remembered by someone. The stone is still there. The silence is still there. And the city, for once, has stopped building over its past, long enough to let you stand inside it. If this journey beneath Edinburgh's streets left something behind in you, a chill that didn't come from the temperature, a sense of the city's weight pressing down from above, then you already understand what History Recreated is here to do. We go where the history is still present in the walls, in the dark, in the details that the polished version always leaves out. Subscribe to History Recreated, drop a comment telling us which moment reached you most, and tell us where in the world's hidden history you want us to take you next. We'll be ready. We're always below the surface.